welcome to the Stop Shitting All Over Yourself podcast, episode 69, dudes.
If you guys are really us, what number are we thinking of? 69, dudes!
I am very excited. For this episode, I have Judi Harrington, author of the book Fuckery, The Life and Times of a Legend in Her Own Mind. It is a fabulous book. It's a quick read. It's only about 150 pages. Really funny, full of short stories about her life on the North Shore. I met her many moons ago at, oh my God, where did I meet? You know what? I kind of feel like I've known Judi forever at this point. But I think I met her at the South Shore Conference for Women. And I loved her book so much that I ended up inviting her to be on the podcast. We recorded the podcast and then something disastrous happened with it. I don't know what happened. It got deleted. It disappeared. So we recorded a podcast like 4 months ago and then it sort of never went out. And that was most unfortunate because it was so good. But Judi is awesome. And she's like, oh my God, you know, I know it, you know, she jokes that she is like Mercury in retrograde walking around. So we recorded it again. Now we're going to jump right into the middle of the conversation. So the topic for our conversation was ostensibly going to be the book Fuckery and how she wrote it and how you become a published author and all that kind of stuff. But Judi lost her mom a year ago, and where we were coming up on the anniversary of her mother's death. And our conversation actually moved more towards the idea that many people feel like they are entitled to the details of your personal life. And there are people that you decide are not entitled to those details. And our conversation kind of started and we were like halfway through before I realized like we were already half an hour into the podcast, and we were just so enjoying it so much that I was like, let's just make this the podcast. So today is all about this idea that there are people who have rights to your information. You know, like if there's somebody that you grew up with and you were close friends with and they feel like they are entitled to the details of your marriage or your life or your struggles or whatever. And you may not feel on your side that that's the kind of relationship that you have with them or that you want to have with them. But they feel entitled to it. And there is this, aside from the inner workings that exist in individual relationships that we all have, there's also societal and cultural expectations about how you share information, who you share it with, what actions you take as a response to a challenge in your life, and who you get advice from. All of these things are really kind of deeply ingrained in us, and it becomes a really big challenge when you hit the period of your life that I'm in particular, and a lot of you are in as well, where you're starting to challenge this idea that you have to do something just because other people told you that you had to do it. And when you start to dig deep into like all of the areas of our lives where we've made choices based off of what people said we should do, this one reared its head accidentally during this conversation. And it was such a powerful conversation that I was like, Judi, let's just make this the podcast. We'll do another podcast later about writing a book, but this one, I want to talk about this. So without further ado, listen in on my conversation with Judi now about minding your business.
I didn't need to really go. It was more like a maintenance thing. Like, I'm feeling okay. But I was like, I called them. I'm like, I'm sorry. I completely flaked. I'm unshowered. I'm not going to get there on time. Just charge me the cancellation fee. Like,
I've done that. I've been like, dude, I'm just not going to make it. So just I'll just pay it. I'm fine with paying
like,
that.
I've really learned that there are certain things, like, I will gladly pay for conveniences in my life.
Absolutely. I think there's some things for which I'm like, okay, the price that I'm going to pay is inconvenience. And then other things, it's like the price I'll pay is money, but I'll get the convenience. And then like, you weigh it each time. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I will totally pay for this.
Literally. And please, I know what kind of, please, I will gladly pay a billable.
Send me the bill, the bills, the checks in the mail.
Right.
Well, I am glad that is being taken care of. So once that's done, then you're free from that.
I'm free from that portion of my tie to him, but there's still other
obviously
things
it's
to negotiate. But that's fine. It's all a process, and we have a pre-trial date in October.
And whatever it is, will maybe great fodder for the books, right? That's what it comes down to. Is life is like
funny that you should say that, because I get a lot of pushback from people like, when's the next book? How's the next book coming? And I'm like, yeah, it's really not. It's a slog. And I'm not really sure if I want to do a sequel to Fuckery just yet.
Some things are meant to stand on their own.
just yet, at minimum, at all, at maximum. Like, I'm just not sure, because there's just been an interesting revelation to me, like in writing Fuckery and then hearing the feedback from people. Like, it is, I mean, it's meant to be a humorous take on a painful. It happened in a painful chapter of my life,
Yeah.
but it was meant to give me solace and perspective that, 2 decades plus were not for naught, right?
Right. It's almost like it's really like it's like healing. It seems like
It
in
was
here,
very
like there's a lot of
therapeutic. It was
processing.
very therapeutic to write
Yeah.
this book. Very therapeutic.
Which I think kind of makes sense because like so then whatever your next book is, you're in a different phase. You'll be in a different phase. Like it's not necessarily going to be the same type of book because you're not the same person you were for the last 20 years.
No, not at all. I'm a completely different person than I even was like a year ago,
Oh, me too.
right? It's just, especially, and there's the other big, seismic shift in my life is I lost my mom last summer.
Oh, dude, I'm so sorry. That is the
Thank you.
worst.
So it will be a year on June 30th, so like a week from today, right? So, you know, I'm not sure if you have both your parents still.
No.
Okay, so that year of firsts
The
after,
first year is the hardest. The first year is
I would
absolutely
say
the
the
hardest.
year of firsts is what's the hardest. And it was a really interesting time for me because I was lucky and she was 88. I had her for 53 years. That's a really good long time to have your mom, right? Um, but what's interesting is like because I lost my dad so young
Mhm.
and I lived without him more of my life than I had him,
Yeah.
that somehow I thought, oh, it won't be so bad.
Yeah.
Oh, it won't be so bad because I've lost a parent, so I know what this
Yeah.
is like.
Not
But
the
it's
first time. You've been
I'm a
through this
very
before.
different. I was a very different person at 53 than I was at 17, quite
Yeah,
obviously, right?
absolutely.
Right? Like
Same.
how naive, right? But that's grief. That's like pre-grief, right? You know it's coming, so you're like, we're gonna brace myself. Nothing could prepare you for this. We're so naive in these ways, right? We think, oh well, because I did this before, I'll be all right, and I'll be. And I was largely relieved for her because her end was not pleasant. It was very painful. She had dementia. She had a lot of physical ailments. She'd been bedridden for the last 5 or 6 months of her life. It was really tough to witness. So I felt largely relief because she wasn't suffering.
Mhm.
Um, but like many mother-daughter relationships, ours was complicated,
Mine was like that too.
right?
I
So
think you
just
mentioned something
know
there that was hard about the relief, like there's like, and there's a guilt attached to that relief,
there's
right?
a
Because
guilt
you're like,
attached to that
please God,
relief,
God,
right?
please God. And then you
And
feel
I'm
bad
like,
because you want
I'm
your mom to
not
be
at all
done.
happy about this, but also because she had, dementia, there's you lose them twice,
Yeah.
right? So there were days that I'd go in and she thought I was my daughter. She thought my older daughter was me. But then she'd have these moments of clarity and she realized it was me. And then she somehow remembered that I'm in the middle of divorcing the husband whom she adores, right? And she's like, "Oh, poor Mick."
Uh,
And I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna go.
Gotta go. Bye. Yeah.
Go." Right,
You
right.
know what though? I think the thing that is true is that I think once you lost your parents though, like they no longer control any part of that relationship. And so now it's like it's really about I'm going to therapy to figure out where this fits in my life and I'm gonna put it like, I think for so many years, when I was still engaging with my dad, I would go to therapy and solve all these problems, and then like he would come in and then just fuck everything up, and I'd be like, well, okay, now I have to go back to therapy
They
and
find a
sort it
whole
out.
new way. It's like
Right,
they can
exactly.
smell that you're getting help, and then they come in with they come in the side door. It's called the rabbit out of the hat trick. It was like all of a sudden, boom, here's some new fuckery
Exactly. Now you're like, well, I have to deal with
to
this now too.
impose,
Now I gotta go back to therapy.
right? Oh God, yeah. But there was that. But I mean, for her physical being, for her own essence, I felt relief for her. And I didn't feel all that much guilt about it, but I did hear myself say to people, I mean, of course I miss her, she's gone, and she's my mom, right? Um, but I'm relieved that she's no longer suffering, right?
Of course.
And people will kind of be like, because we're not supposed to say things like that about our moms. Moms are
Oh my
supposed to be
God.
revered and put on a pedestal, which of course we all know is the root of misogyny, right? When we're
Do you mind if we
replacing,
take the podcast in this direction? Because I'm loving this conversation.
we can totally take whatever
Let's just
direction
keep
this goes
going.
in. It's
I want to
fine.
just keep this
It's
going because
fine.
I feel like this is such a powerful thing you're talking about in terms of how we deal with grief, death, our mothers. Like you
Yeah, there's something
said,
about this that's so interesting to me. And because I mean, it's so forefront of my mind. So thank you for being flexible in this. And um, because I mean, it's going to be a year next week. I can't believe that it's going to be a year. And because I remember the first few weeks, and she died right before the 4th of July weekend, which incidentally, my family tends to die around the holiday. My dad died right before Veterans Day. So there's
wow,
always like
that's
some
why I was
holiday
going to take
weekends. We
tickets
have to,
or,
we
this
have to
like,
postpone things. And I'm just like, but I remember those first few weeks, I felt like I was walking through time and it was like pea soup. Everything was just like a slog, you know?
yeah, it's so, and the brain
And
fog, it's like,
the brain
what?
fog was so bad. And I was just so physically exhausted. I don't remember being this tired or being that tired um, since my kids were newborns, you know? It's like, oh my God, I'm just so tired. I was like napping twice a day, like a fucking like a toddler, you know?
Oh,
And
you
I remember
you've been through so
thinking,
much.
I can't even imagine there I can't even imagine it being a year from now. Like I can't even imagine that time's gonna continue, right? Not that I had some kind of self-harming thought or anything. It just felt like time was never gonna move on from this.
You know what it is? It's almost like I didn't understand the cognitive dissonance. Like there was a world that didn't have my mom in it. That was what was weird. Is like I don't understand. Like I
That's
don't get
what
it.
it
And
is. That's
I
what
think,
it
and then I
is.
think it's the shock portion of it. Where you're literally just like, wait a minute, what is happening here?
But
Um,
it was so interesting for us too, because she I mean, her decline really started in COVID. She was a very active person, out walked several miles a day. She lived next door to my brother. They were out doing things all the time. And then COVID, of course, we all welcome to the great indoors, right? And then we were all, you know, separated from one another. And that's when my husband and I split up. But I didn't tell my mom about it until after we were vaccinated. So I lived this lie with her for like almost 9 months.
wow.
And we finally got together in person, and I can't believe I managed to like pull this thing off and her not figure it out. But um there was a lot of plausible deniability. She's like, oh, it's so quiet at your house. What's going on? I'm like, oh, everybody's out. Not
You
alive.
mentioned though that when you said something that she always loved him and was like and
Yeah.
I
But here's what's interesting is that part of my dread of telling her this is not even like Catholic guilt, because my mom was a Catholic Mother Hall of Famer. I mean, said the rosary every day, mass at 8 a.m., like super devout Catholic, right? I was sitting at lunch, and my brother, who knew what was going on, he had been a great, partner in crime, as it were. And she's like, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you." And it was just a couple of days before my birthday. She's like, "I'm so happy to see you, Jude, and you look so good, and so happy we get to celebrate your birthday together. And we both got vaccinated so close together, and I'm so happy that we can do this." And me too, me too. She goes, "So what's going on? How are you? Why?" I said, "Yeah, there's no easy way to tell you this, so I'm just going to tell you this." And she looked at me, and I think she thought I was going to tell her I had cancer or
right.
something. And I said, "Mick and I are separated. We're going to get divorced." And she was like, "What?" And I said, "Yes." I feel terrible that I didn't tell you this sooner, but I didn't think it was a phone conversation. I wanted to give you the respect of telling you face to face. And I said, it's never one thing, Mom. But I can tell you that we eventually just started to bring out the worst in each other. And now we've decided that we're going to part ways. And she said, what about the kids? And I said, well, that's complicated too, because right now I'm living in Medford, they're living with him, and in their new house, they had moved to another town. I said, and right now they've chosen not to speak with me at the moment. And she was like, oh my God. And I thought for sure the next words out of her mouth were going to be, what did you do?
Oh God. Well, I gotta tell you, like, what is like that says something right there, like when like we are conditioned to a space, because like that was honestly what I would expect to hear as well. Like, what did you
What did
do?
you
To
do?
drive him away.
What did you do? Right. I
What
said
a
there was
what
nothing salacious here. This was just the human nature. Like there's no one thing, right? It's accumulation of a lot of little things. It's a death by thousand tiny cuts,
can I ask you
right?
a question?
You're
Like, since
bleeding
we're
over the
talking
phone. What's that?
about this, can I ask you a question? Because as we're talking about this and sort of like, and we are talking, sort of like not
Mhm.
tripping all over ourselves about these things, I'm curious that, and feel free, I know this is kind of a personal question, but when you were going through this process, were you did it ever come into your mind that, well, we can't do this because what will people think, or what will my mother think, or what will this, like, or what the expectations that people had of you, your marriage, your life, the things that you were supposed to be or do, did that
There
ever,
was,
like, how did that
yeah,
impact
there
you as
was
part of the
definitely like, oh my God, how am I going to explain this?
Mhm.
Right. But it's going to sound so weird, but it's so true. I remember having this thought very often. I said, this is the blessing of COVID, is that nobody knows where you are or what you're doing. Everyone just thinks you're home. Right. So you
Yeah.
could, like, if you saw people on Zoom, you saw them on Zoom, you have a different background or whatever. Um, but I didn't talk to a lot of my friends on Zoom. And it was like I was mostly texting with people. It was a very small group of friends who knew the real deal. And I said, this is not for public consumption. I'll let you know when it is. Right now, I'm just working through it. And then, and then eventually I got to a point where, the world started to open up again, like that early summer. And I started to be out and about, and people would be like, oh, hey, how's Mick and the kids? I said, yeah, so Mick and I split up. And they were like, oh, I didn't know. I said, well, there wasn't a press release, and there's actually not going to be a Q&A. And that was my policy, was that if I hadn't, it was like a delineator for me. Like if I didn't think to reach out to you in COVID to tell you this news,
Yeah.
then it wasn't really something that I felt like I needed to then explain later. Because as time goes on, the story gets longer,
Mhm.
right? And then you tell people very soon, and then it's like a continuing update,
Right. If
right?
this happened and then that happened, and we
Right,
sold the
right.
house or whatever things that are
This
happening.
happened and that happened. And then people will ask, so what's going on now? What's going on now? And I'm like, it's moving along. So now it's just like, it's amazing how we'll suddenly now I compress the story, right? And we're like, I didn't even know you guys split up. I said, yeah, it really wasn't something that we felt the need to announce publicly. It was a private matter, and we were also living through really extraordinary times as a society as a whole. Everyone on planet Earth was indoors. So, like, there's no good time for this, and there's no good Hallmark card for this. And people say, I'm sorry. And I'm like, thank you. Then I quickly follow it with, it's congratulations more than condolences, but I understand where you're coming from, why people say they're sorry.
I think there's two things that you said that I think are super powerful there. I think the first is that we are all conditioned to think that we owe somebody an explanation, right? Or
I,
that we
one of
owe
the most
people
radical
explanations.
acts is to stop explaining yourself, right? Which is
I
another form of
love
shitting
this.
all over yourself, right?
Stop explaining yourself. You don't have to explain
Perfect.
yourself. I love the answer of like, no, like it's so short, like I love the one of we missed like we didn't send out a press release, right? And like I love that because it makes people laugh, but then like it
Yeah,
moves on into like something else. Like it's a kind way
yeah,
of saying, honestly, if I didn't tell you, then you didn't need to know in that way.
Yeah, and there was some people who were like, I can't believe you didn't call me and tell me. I would have been a confidant for you. And I'm like, the fact that I didn't call you probably tells you like how our relationship is, right?
Like
And that's
that
what
you are
you
not
say
a
that
confidant for me.
you're not a confidant for me. Like I love that you want to offer that kind of support to me, but I have learned that sometimes support feels more like an interrogation.
Mhm.
And I just didn't feel like answering a never ending list of questions. So I just said, no, no
A group
questions.
of people, right? Because you got one person, then another person, and now you're just kind of living in that space.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this earlier on, about your book and like what your next book would be and whatnot, right? And I think that like that goes back to as how we change as people. So like now we're like we're a year or so out, things have happened. You're such a different person now than like a year ago. And it's like, and I think that like and if you think about the fact that you started having these conversations with people 9 months later, you were already evolving as a person. You moved on from this, right? So everybody else is
Yes,
still in shock and like, and you're
yes,
like doing fine. It's totally
yes.
fine.
But then there was, I'm not gonna lie, there was a point too where there were some friends who were also in their own pods of fuckery, right? So they're
Mhm.
dealing with like teenagers who were like having social emotional issues, or just like life, or parents who were ill, like all the, it was like that. I want to say it was like last summer, I felt like was the real emergence of people.
Mhm.
We, I, I'm not saying that everyone has their own thing about how they handle COVID, right? I'm not going to get
Right.
into
No,
that,
I'm with
but
you, but I do agree with you that now, like, we're entering back into quote unquote real life.
we're back to, this is what we're now calling the new normal, but like whatever. So I call it the reemergence. So that's
Okay,
my
I like it. I like that term. The
we're
reemergence. It
reemerging.
sounds so
But
dramatic.
last summer, it was like I was at a 50th birthday party for a friend, and there was a bunch of people I hadn't seen literally since before the pandemic, right? And someone said, I noticed that you went back to using Harrington. My married name was McLaughlin. I said, yes. I said, you may or may not know, Nick and I split up in early quarantine. I said, it was time. And it's a long, long story, as they all are. Every story is complicated. I'll spare you the details, but suffice to say, we had a good run, and it's amicable as best we can be, and that's really it. But then I'd say things, oh well, now I have a boyfriend, and people are like, what? So sometimes like the shock factor, depending on who it was, I would be like, oh yeah, and I'm seeing somebody. What? And
No,
one,
coming
one of my
back.
girlfriends said to me, you actually won quarantine because you didn't have to deal with teenagers. You got to deal with your husband. You got
It's
to live
true.
with yourself. You're living like every mom's fantasy
I was
right
gonna say
now.
that sounds like a sweet quarantine right there.
Yeah, and in some ways, yes.
But in
But
other
the
ways,
price,
not so
but
much.
my price of admission was steep.
That's a really high price of admission, dude. Like I can't
Steep,
like that is yeah.
steep. Being estranged from your children
Yeah.
is a steep price to pay. It's a really steep price to pay. I mean, and I mean, we've
I
shared enough,
have no children,
but
so I don't
for the listeners out there, I mean,
they know.
we've moved in a better direction in terms of the kids' relationship. My older daughter um, came back to me, as I like to say, in 20. What year are we in? I don't know what day it
I
is.
don't. I was gonna say, please don't ask me what year we're actually
So
in.
2023. So it was
2023.
like,
We're
yeah.
2023.
So it was 2022. So it was March of 2022,
It's like a
and
year ago.
it's like a year ago. And she came back to me, interestingly enough, the day after I submitted my completed manuscript to copy editing.
Oh wow, that's like 2 really big days.
Like 2 huge days, right? Like I released this out. I'm like, okay, I've said all I'm going to say in this book. I hand it over to the copy editors. And I'm breathing this sigh of relief. I'm also feeling like I forgot my homework somewhere, like that dream where you like suddenly discover that you have like a 27-page paper due,
And you haven't done
or
anything.
or a class you never went to, or like whatever. They had that kind of feeling. But then the next day, and this is just teenagers for you. She called. I answered the phone. She's like, "Hi, do you have a minute?" I'm like, and I said, "I absolutely do. What can I help you with?" And she needed help with, she has a 529 plan and needed some help moving those funds around and paying off her tuition bill and all that stuff. And I said, "I'm happy to help you." And so we did that little administrative thing. And then I said, "How's school? How are you?" You know, kind of small talk, small talk. And then all of a sudden I heard this little voice go, "How are you?" Yeah. And I said, I'm good." And I said, "I'm not gonna lie, I miss you and your sibling. Um, I just am sitting here writing for some companies. I'm still doing that. I'm working as a copywriter, but I actually just finished writing a book." She's like, "You wrote a book?" I said, "Yeah, I did. P.S. You're in it." And oh, and she started laughing. I said, "I can assure you that there is no story in this book that you haven't heard me say and talk about at the kitchen table."
Mhm.
And she said, "Okay." And I said, "It's fine." You know,
Did
and
she get to read the book before it was published?
she did not read it before it was published, but she has since read it, and she says she's just so happy that I wrote this book. She's like, "I love that you wrote this book and you chose these stories, and it reminds me of so many things, like how much love we grew up with." So that was, because that's a
That's
scary
important.
thing to
That's
write a book
super.
about
You
your
know
own
what?
kids.
That's key, right? Because it's not, you wrote it to say like the 20 years weren't a waste, that it was something that like it's a reminder, because it's so easy when you're sort of at the end of something to
Oh
like really
God, yeah.
forget how much you did together, and you're
He had a
talking about
lot of
like
laughs. He's a funny guy. You know, he's funny in a way that a lot of people don't expect him to be funny. And he's we had a really good run. I always say we had a great run.
right.
We were meant
But
to be
like,
together. We weren't meant to stay together. Like that's okay, right?
and I
But
think that helps, the kids to sort of see that too. But I want to go back to the mother-daughter thing, because you said, this is teenagers, but I was also thinking, this goes back to like mother-daughter relationships are so freaking complicated. Like
so
they
fun,
are, like
so
there
fun.
is love, there's anger, there's rage, there's so much that's in there. There's happiness,
It's
resentment.
resentment. I'm like, you have a way better life than me, and I'm actually kind of jealous of you for the things that I actually gave you. And then you have to like check yourself with that, right? And and then on the other side of it, I always say there's that generational divide, right? Like when
Yeah,
you're at this, on the younger end of the spectrum, you think, "Oh my God, you people don't understand anything. You got the olds, right? Whatever the
yeah.
term is now,
I
right?
remember, yeah, the older
The
folk.
olds, right?" And my parents were also non-traditional, and they were in their mid to late 30s when they had us in the 60s and 70s.
Oh,
So my parents were the oldest parents, save one other friend of mine whose parents were just slightly older than mine. But our parents were also, they were depression era kids. They were
mhm.
very old fashioned. They were very conservative, right? Um, but now I see like there was certain wisdom and things that they taught us, right? But now I'm like on the other side of it, and my kids are teaching me things that are
Yes.
sometimes uncomfortable, or I don't always understand, but just choose to accept because they're my children, right? And I love them no matter what, right? And my kids have been on the gender journey, and I don't mean that in any derogatory way. I
The
don't know what.
gender journey is a journey, dude. It is like an
And
insane journey.
right, and but as like a cisgender female, I feel like there's also I also live in perpetual fear that I'm turning into a female Archie Bunker because I was raised by Archie Bunker. So like I'm always very mindful of my language around this. But like my kids have come to me, in the story in the book, part-time lesbian. When my older one came to me, "I'm a lesbian. I love you no matter who you love." 3 months later, I have a boyfriend. I love you no matter who you love.
Right.
Broke up with him. I think I'm a lesbian. I love you no matter who you love. Like, seriously, the message doesn't change.
Right. It's just, I love you no matter what, just do
I
the
love
thing.
you no matter what. And then it came, I identify as non-binary and these are my pronouns. That's great. I love you no matter who you love. I'm changing my name. I love you no matter what you call yourself, what pronouns you want to use. Now we're gonna have to extend it a little bit, but you're my kid. Like, that's my job
So
as your
does
mom.
your
That's my
daughter use
joy
they
as your
them?
mom.
Actually, does your child use they them pronouns?
My younger one uses they them. My older
Got
one
it.
uses she her. So
They, them.
she's been around the block, I guess, a little bit about it. And I think she how she identifies, she'll say she's cisgender, but she bisexual. So she
Yeah.
dates men
Yep.
and women.
Yep.
And I'm like, as long as it's consensual and no one's getting hurt, that's fine. Like,
I mean, really, those are the key elements of like a relationship. You know, it's like those are the important stuff. Consent,
yeah,
that kind of thing.
yeah,
I actually really love that you brought this up because I think that I personally, so when I was 11, I came out as a boy to everybody around me, and nobody believed me. But it was just like 1988, so like they were like, "You're a tomboy," and I was like, "No, that's not it." And as I grew up, and then of course, eventually I realized I was gender fluid and, obviously all these things that I learned. But
right,
at that stage where we were, because you and I are close to the same age, this point locked off, right? It kind of just, I said, okay, well, then I guess I'm a girl and this is what it is, right? And it is because that's what everybody said. So I may as well.
somehow society knows better than I do.
I mean, don't, of course they do. So now as an older person, watching kids like your daughter and your other child, that is what has taught me. And it gave me the language to then, like, some of these boxes started to open and I started to revisit them and start to like be like, now I have language for things I didn't have language for. But what I was
Right.
finding is that our generation of women struggles because we have the philosophy I've not yet met a woman who hasn't been totally open, loving, and willing, and just like, yeah, what do I call you? How do I do it? Tell me what to do.
Right.
The,
Yeah.
the issue always comes, I think, in the fact that we are of a certain age and we're now having to relearn some things, and we're so
Yeah.
worried about doing it
Yeah.
wrong.
There's some
And,
unlearning and relearning, right?
and it's
Yeah.
nobody minds doing it, but we're worried about doing it wrong and accidentally hurting somebody. And so
Well, like Brene Brown says, I don't want to be right. It's not about being right, it's about getting it right.
exactly. And so I love that you told this story. And I would actually be curious to know from you, how did you navigate this as someone who is now learning these things, with your kids? And now you're like, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to make sure that I'm not like, I'm
Well,
being
it's
mindful,
interesting
I'm learning.
because my younger one came back to me in early April, and we've been in kind of sporadic contact. She's a little different. She's a different person than her sister, right?
Does
And
the younger one use they, them pronouns?
the younger one used to say them,
Yep.
and I was very mindful when we were on the phone. I said, I just want to make sure I'm getting it right. Like, what pronouns do you want to use? And she's like they them, and I think she's okay as well. But I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to use they them because at least I'll just stick with
Right.
them. Right? Like,
Default to they, them.
default to they them, right? And of course, I've also gone on my linguistic rant that singular they dates back to the time of Chaucer. So
Yeah.
this is like a reemergence of that
You. Thank
pronoun.
you. Thank you. Because
Yes.
that's always the first thing everyone
Yes.
says is it's plural. And I'm like, no, it's not. I was like, it is
It's
plural.
not new.
It's
It's a
also singular.
reemergence, the reintroduction into the lexicon. But that's the story for another day. I guess a whole other podcast altogether.
Oh my
But
God. Absolutely. We'll do an English language podcast about pronouns. That would be fun. Just like language.
that would be awesome. But so at that time, they were in a relationship, and it was a polyamorous relationship. And so he said to me, I get this, like, is complicated, and like maybe you don't understand it. I said, you're right, I don't. I'm like, but it's not for me to understand. I said, again, as long as everyone consents and no one's getting hurt, then that's what matters. And those are the things that you need to always keep in mind, regardless
Mhm.
of the, tapestry of the relationship. And to me, that felt like a good, like, I felt good saying that,
Yeah.
and it landed well. And that's what made me feel even better about it. I was like, I'm not it's not my job to understand it. Like, and I always say to my kids, they used to say this to me all the time, you're straight as fuck. I'm like, I know I am. Like, I'm straight as fuck. You're not. That's okay. We can all coexist. Like, it's fine. Right. And their dad's still like, I'm not really sure. I'm like, it doesn't matter what we think. It's our
Right.
job to
That's the best. It doesn't matter what we think.
It's our job. It's actually none of our business.
Yes. Oh my
It's
God.
actually like none of our business. Like, okay, do I like to think about my kids having sex? Absolutely not.
But
I
that
like to
doesn't
think, I
matter.
don't even want to
Whatever,
know when I'm having
whatever.
sex, right? But I'm like, I think that's just human
That's just
nature.
parent stuff, I think. Like, I don't like, it doesn't matter who your child is sleeping with. You don't want to know. You don't want to think about it.
No.
You don't want to think about you having sex either. Oh my God. I was at a conference meeting the other day, and one of the people was talking about how her, like, she's totally open. She's just like, she's blunt, right? And so she's having dinner with her kids, and her husband there. She's about 70 or 60, and so her kids are like, I don't know, they're like 20, 30. Said, Mom, do you have sex with dad? And she's like, yep, all the time. And then it just went on. And she was like, I was like, I can only imagine what that moment was like at the table.
Oh my
Like, I'm talking
God.
about, like, I love her, just that she was like, yep, yeah, but
Good for
and then
her.
so in her mind, she's like, I was worried that, like, she was imagining like what positions and this, and really they're just like, oh, I think parents have sex, and it's like,
Yeah,
you're
it's just
just
kind of
shocked.
like, it actually just lives like a sentence in my head. That's really all it lives as. Like, I'm not thinking anything
Yeah,
beyond.
it's just, exactly. That's exactly how I feel it. We all try to do with various people in our lives. We're like, I don't want to think about that.
I joke all the time. I don't want to know when I'm having it. Never mind hearing about anybody else. No, but
Oh my God, that's so funny.
but and that's just to say, like, that's your business. Like, I don't.
That ultimately is what it is. And I think that the point that which I really like, and I honestly, because I realized we've been talking forever, and I was like, oh my God, we have to actually end now because we're at 11, which is honestly great timing. But we were going to talk first. I do not want to miss an opportunity to say, listen, this is Judi Harrington, everybody. Welcome. And to the podcast at the very end. She wrote a book called Fuckery, and it's a great book. So you really need to buy it. All the people that we've been talking about today are in this book, and you'll get to know them really well. But I think that, like, the mic drop moment, and there have been a lot of really good ones from this podcast, but I think one of the really big ones is that I think we all really need to be very mindful about what is and isn't our business. That's really, I think, like, as you say that, it's like, I think we need to really.
Oh my God, that is kind of the overarching theme here, isn't it?
Yeah. It really is, because even the first conversation, the first sentence that we talked about was people asking you about your divorce and whether or not it's their business. So I think I might call this podcast "It's Not Your Business" with Judi Harrington.
It's not your business. It's not
and
your
I'll
business.
make another graphic, which is fine, because I'm going to
Because
change
the
it.
irony is that this book is like me telling everybody my life story, but now I'm going to say
they need to read it. I'll tell them that before that they should watch the podcast and then read the book, or if you want to really do it, read the book and then watch the podcast, and like the epilogue, and hear all these stories. Judi, I am so excited to have had you on today. When people want to buy your book, actually, Judi is also, by the way, a coach, a writing coach, and can help you get your book published. So, and I know I'm throwing this in at the end, but I want to make sure that everybody knows about it, because you're so awesome. They love you. They're going to read the book and they'll be like, how do I find Judi? We're going to have to do another one of these where we actually talk about the book.
We actually talk about the book, right?
We're talking about, but for now, and I actually want to do a podcast about about the book incubator thing, because I feel like that's also
that'd be so much fun. But basically, I am a copywriter.
Tell us all what you do. Tell us everything you do.
And writing coach. And all of my stuff lives at Judi411.com, Judi411.com. If you want to know how I got that name, read the book.
Read the book. It's in here. It's actually great. Some rando person asked you about something at Faneuil Hall, right? I remember
Oh,
that. Some
yes.
random person, and everybody asked her things. So you know what?
Everyone asks me
When you're
everything.
done reading it, just send
The
her a PM
world's
and ask
most
her a random
approachable
question.
woman right here. Yeah. But it's available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and bookshop.org. And I strongly encourage people to purchase through Bookshop wherever possible, because you are supporting independent bookstores as opposed to the big
Yes.
box. So
Please do that. And if you are in Plymouth, I believe it is being carried at Books and Sundry, so you can also get a copy there, where Judy did book reading. All right, Judy, thank you so much.
it's
Have a
my joy.
wonderful
Thank
day.
you
It was
so
so
much. All right.
great.